Well, welcome everybody. I'm Danielle with Birdland Media Works, and I'm joined by Cindy Riednauer of Skinny Leopard Media, and we are really excited to have an award-winning broadcaster, Graham Mack, with us today. And we're going to talk a little bit about the book, The Data Collectors, and we'll talk about his broadcasting career and maybe a little bit of his music career. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here across the Atlantic. Isn't this cool that we can do this like this? You know, it's just, it's amazing. And this is the first time you and I have actually had a conversation, never mind met, because it was all done through email when we did the book. Yes. But it's so lovely to be part of this and to actually know that you are a real person. And it's nice to meet you too as well, Cindy. We've only just this second, last couple of minutes just met. Yeah, but yeah.
So, Graham, give us your background. Give us how you got into audiobooks and tell us about yourself, whatever you want to share.
Okay. Which one do you want first, background or how I got into audiobooks? Because they're very different.
Background. Let's do
background. First. Okay. Well, I was born in Liverpool, which is a city you may have heard of in the northwest of England. And I grew up just outside Liverpool, 15 miles outside, a place called Great Sankey near Warrington. And it was a working class family. And my parents were very old-fashioned, kind of, you've got to get a trade and everything. But I was more, I wanted to be a photographer, or I wanted to be on the radio. And they kind of discouraged that. They weren't encouraging parents. And I ended up becoming an electrician apprentice, which wasn't me. Mm-hmm. And the people who hired me figured that out within 12 months and ended that little arrangement. So I ended up working at a plant hire place where they hire out, machinery and tools. So my job consisted of cleaning dirt off rotavators and chipping cement out of the inside of cement mixer barrels after people had these things on hire. And my father was a hard hat construction worker, worked petrochemical plants. And he worked for most of my childhood. He worked away. Sometimes he'd be in the Middle East, for 3 months at a time. And he'd be home for a week and then away for 3 months. But even when he was working in the UK, he'd be working in Wales, a little away from us, and he would be only home on weekends and stuff. So he finally got offered a job that he could take his family with him to move to where the job was. So this was when I was 18, and the job was in New Zealand. It's the other side of the world.
That's where I'm moving to, depending on what happens with this election, just so you know.
Is it? You think
That's on my short list.
Yeah. So we all moved, my parents and my younger sister, who's 4 years younger. I was 18, and we moved to New Zealand. And I didn't have a career or anything. I'd been in this plant hire place. So I went down to the recruitment place, and I got hired on this same oil refinery construction site as what they called a trades assistant, a TA, which meant I basically worked on the end of a grinder preparing steel to be welded. Ooh. And I did that for a few months, and then the foreman came up to me and said, "How would you like to be a pipe fitter?" And this is an oil refinery, which is all pipes. And it's a big job. There was 2,000 men on the job at any one time. I say men because it was mostly men on the job at any one time. But as the 3 years of the project, there was 10,000 people worked on the site as different trades were needed at different stages of the construction. So they needed pipe fitters, and they didn't have any in New Zealand because it's more of a farming country. So they were training up local people. And as I'd been hired locally, I was eligible to do. Anyway, they put me in this pipe school to train me to be a pipe fitter for 5.5 weeks. And 5.5 weeks later, they said, "Okay, you're a pipe fitter. Oh, and this guy's your TA." So now I've got a guy working for me, and I was a TA 5.5 weeks earlier. And I spent 3 years working on this construction site. My father was a supervisor on a different area of the site, so I didn't have anything really to do with him at work. And after a few years, I was 21, they decided, my sister and my parents decided that they wanted to move back to the UK. And I really quite liked New Zealand, so I said, well, I want to stay. So I never actually left home. I was abandoned on the other side of the world. So they came back to the UK, and I went and found some lodgings with an old Scottish lady who just took people in as a lodger, and I lived there for a bit. All my friends were in New Zealand, and then shortly after that I met my wife. She's still my wife. She wasn't my wife when I met her, obviously. I met her at a wedding that I wasn't invited to, but
we'll get back to that in a minute.
Yeah. And so I met her, and then so we decided to get married. So then when I was 23, which is like 1987, we got married, and my parents came out from Britain for the wedding and everything, and then we got married, and after 3 years, this construction site had now become a fully functioning oil refinery, and I'd managed to get onto the maintenance side of it. I blagged my way with a contractor telling them I was a steam fitter. They were a company that looked after the maintenance of the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, and I told them I was a steam fitter, even though I'd only ever put pipes together. I didn't know what went inside them. So I was working with this contractor, and I found out that the guys who were the air conditioning guys were making more money. So I did the air conditioning apprenticeship by correspondence, and I managed to do the 4-year apprenticeship in 6 months because I just filled in the assignments, but then they wouldn't let me sit the exam. But anyway, I was working heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and my wife and I had lived in Australia for all this time. She'd been on holiday to Sydney once. New Zealand at the time. She'd been to Sydney on holiday once. I'd never been to Australia, and it's only like 3 hours away. So we went on holiday to Sydney, and we decided, let's just move to Sydney.
Wow.
So we put the house on the market, and about 6 weeks later we arrived in Sydney, didn't know anyone in Australia, not a soul. We arrived with a suitcase and a toolbox at the airport. I went through the yellow pages and found the adverts for air conditioning companies and rang them all up and got offered a couple of jobs, was offered a job, was given a van. Next minute we're living the Aussie dream in Australia. But after about a year of doing that, I decided that, what do I really want out of life? I'm like 26, 27, and I loved listening to the radio, always did. Julie, when we got married, found all these bits of paper that I'd had from England where I was working out different radio presenters I liked listening to at what times, on what stations, and where to find them. And, and all the time I'd been sending messages back to my friends in England. I wouldn't send them letters. I'd send them cassettes. I'd make little radio shows. This is, what I did. And I kind of realized listening to the radio, and I loved the talk radio in Sydney. They have a very vibrant talk radio thing. It's not like the US. It's not all Rush Limbaugh and right-wing wacko. It's more just a spirited conversation with Australians who love to talk. And so, and I liked that, and I decided I'd been in a ceiling space all day, and I was stinking hot, and there was fiberglass insulation down my back irritating me, and I'm listening to the guy on the radio, and I'm thinking, I'm in traffic. He's got no idea how to connect with the people who've had a pretty rubbish day like I'd had. And by the time I got home, I was so wound up, and I walked in the door, and I said to Julie, I've had the radio on in the van, and I've worked out what I want to do. I want to be on the radio.
Wow.
And if she'd have said, just be quiet, wash your hands, your dinner's on the table, I would never have done it. But she said, yeah, I see that, go on then. And so when we didn't know anyone, we didn't know anyone in Australia, never mind anyone in radio. I had no background. So we had to work out how to do it from scratch, and I did a couple of community college courses where broken down old disc jockeys take money off you and teach you to read commercials. And then I did some community radio at a community radio station in Sydney for no money. And then I got frustrated because they have the Australian Film, Television and Radio School, which is the top radio school in Australia, and they only take 12 students a year for the course. It might have changed now, but they only and so the 6 months of it is them selecting these 12, and I didn't think I had a chance. But I got through. The first stage was you had to write a 1,000-word essay about yourself, and it had to be typed. Well, we didn't have a computer or a typewriter or anything. I'd never typed. I was an air conditioning engineer in high-rise buildings. So it got right down to the deadline, and I decided I'll just write it all out by hand. And it was a really sitting up at night with a 6-pack of beer. I used to drink then, and just writing about yourself and why you've come to this point that you should be, led on this course. And I finished it off, and the next morning Julie said to me, well, have you got this thing? I said, yeah, but it's not typed. It's just written out by hand. She took it into a place in town and got them to type it out.
Wow.
And then I put in the application, and then I got a letter back saying you're through the first stage of Australian Film, TV and Radio School. And I'm like, well, wow, that's pretty good. At least I can say I got through the first stage. And the next stage was you had to go to a commercial radio station and do a demo. And I went to a radio station called 2SM in North Sydney, which at the time was a country music station. And they gave me all these things to do, and I was terrible. And, I've got an English accent, and one of the commercials that you had to read was for the Fair Dinkum Aussie barbecue thing that really needed a proper Australian, it had been written for Australian bush kind of, thing. So I went through all this, I recorded it, and they took the reel-to-reel tape and were in the control room transferring it onto a cassette for me. And I'm talking to the guy there and whatever. And then after he gave me the cassette, he goes, there you go, send that to Afters, that's your demo. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. They don't send the demo. I've got the demo. And so, because I'd been doing community radio, I had a little 4-track, a Tascam 4-track machine, and I still had a microphone from when I used to be in a band in New Zealand, but it wasn't a broadcast microphone. It was a Shure SM58. It was a stage microphone. It wasn't proper. Anyway, so I thought, well, I could send this in, and I won't get on the Australian Film, TV and Radio course. I've got a choice. I can send this in, or I can cheat. But these are my choices. I can if I get caught cheating, they won't take me, but if I send that in, I'm pretty sure they're not going to take me anyway. I've got nothing to lose. I'm going to cheat. And we lived on a main road, so I sat in the front room with a blanket over my head, this stage microphone, and I still had all the materials, all the copy for the commercials and the weather forecasts and all the rest of it. And I did them again perfect, and then I had this bloody barbecue thing to do. And what I did was I read it as an announcer, but in the bits that need an Australian, I just went, I can't remember the copy, but it was something to do with, the Fair Income Aussie Barbecue Company. Have they got the barbecue for you? And I just went into character whenever it just needed it, and carried on just in my normal voice. And I put it in and thought, oh, there we go. And then they said you're through to the final stage, and the final stage was an interview, and they had like 4 people just firing questions at you in like a horseshoe situation. And I can remember at one stage of it, because I was so determined to do this, I said to them, you know what? It doesn't matter if I don't get onto this course. And they all went like, they know this is the top course in Australia. I said, no, because I'm going to do this anyway. Whether I get on this course or not, you're not going to stop me. So you might as well have me on the course. This is,
That could have gone really well or really badly.
Exactly. So then we were I'd always wanted to see Paul McCartney live. It's 1993. Paul McCartney's tour is coming to Australia. It's announced. It's at the Sydney Entertainment Centre, and we'd seen Eric Clapton and Billy Joel there before, and the Sydney Entertainment Centre is a vast arena, and we were right at the back, and it was not the experience I wanted. I said to Julia, if we're going to see Paul McCartney, we're not sitting at the back. We're going to queue up early in the morning when the tickets go on sale, and we're going to get some good seats. And so we were outside the ticket office, outside the State Theatre, which is where their ticket office was, and we'd been there since I think about 5 a.m., and I was in my work gear, ready to start work at like 8 o'clock when, in the city doing air conditioning. And what they did was they took the names of the first, I think, 20 people in the line and said, as soon as these go on sale, when the thing hits, we'll type yours in first and get it. So they'd already taken our names, so we knew we had a good chance of getting some good seats. And I had a mobile phone for work, but it was like a brick, the old cell phones. Yeah. And this thing rang while I've just found out I'm going to get good seats. and it was Australian Film, TV and Radio School, and they told me I'd got on the course.
Wow.
And it totally changed my life, because I knew without that a guy with my background would never get into radio. And then we got seats in row 14 at the Sydney Entertainment Centre.
It was your day.
Yeah, it was some day. And I went on the Australian Film, TV and Radio School with the other 11 people, and I came top. I aced it, luckily. It was hard work. It was so much fun. It was the best time of my life. And then from that, the regional radio stations in Australia, they always look at the 12 that come out when they're looking, and they hired me to do breakfast 5 hours drive west of Sydney in the middle of nowhere, a little town called Parkes. And I went out there to Hits and Memories 2PK was the name of the radio station. And I was a professional broadcaster, and I just couldn't believe my luck. And I got some voiceover work in Sydney, which we did down the line from there. It was actually a Beatles promotion, and they wanted a Liverpool accent, and that was the start of it all. That's how it. So that's the background.
He was training for audiobooks even then, having to do all the character voices. Yeah. So that was how it all started. That's the background.
That's a great story. I mean, because it sounds like it was almost fated in a way, but yet you had to still put the work in, or else it would never have happened.
Yeah, I was very, very lucky for them to take me seriously with the wrong accent. There weren't people who sounded like me on the radio in Australia. They all sounded Australian, and they all had much deeper voices too. You know?
Really?
Yeah, they were all like, "This is." It'd be like Triple M triples your music. Yeah, we triple your rock on Triple M, and I sounded nothing like that. And yeah, but hey, I got away with it, and it went really well, and that was how I started.
I'm hearing the book The Alchemist, where there's a line in it where when you want something, the universe conspires with you. So you knew exactly what you wanted and set the intention. I mean, you had to put in that. It's an amazing story and quite inspiring.
The thing was for it, though, I think most of it was just that bloody mind of determination, because when I'd made my mind up I was going to do it, that nothing was going to stop me. And I knew there'd be stuff in the way. I thought, well, nothing's going to. After the Australian Film, TV and Radio School, no one's going to stop me. People can slow me down, but no one can stop me. It was like when I was at the community radio station, they made me do a course. And when I'd finished the course, I'd still never been on the air. And I said, well, now I want an air shift. And they said, well, no, we haven't got any slots, because this is all volunteers. It's all unemployed people and retired people running this radio station. So the format was heavy metal and jazz. So they had no slots. That you have to wait till somebody leaves till you can get like an hour a week on this community radio station in Sydney. Well, I took their schedule and I found out that they were off the air on a Saturday night, Sunday morning between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. And I just said to him, there's a slot, I'll go in there. Like, they weren't going to stop me, because I didn't care when I was on, and everyone else is doing an hour a week, and I've got like 4 hours every week to really get into it. And then I decided I wanted to take phone calls, because I really wanted the interaction of, I like talking to people, and, and they didn't have a phone system that went through the broadcast desk. You simply couldn't take phone calls to air on this radio station. So because I had all the tools out in the van in the back, and I'm there when no one else is in the building, I wired, while the songs were playing, and I'm playing CDs and vinyl records, while the songs are on, I'm under the desk with a screwdriver and a drill, running an extension line from the phone out in the office, and I ran an extension into the studio with a plug-in, and each week I would go in, and the first thing I did, I bought an answer machine, and I plug that in, and I'd say, you can call up, and people would leave messages, and then I'd take the cassette out of the machine and put it and play the messages on the air.
Oh, wow.
I found out I could use the answer phone as a speakerphone, and then I stuck the guest mic into the speaker, and now I'm doing live phone calls. And then before the morning would come, I'd have to hide it all away, and took it all away so that they didn't know. And somebody heard it one night and said, how are you taking phone calls? And they couldn't work out how I was doing it. But It was because I just decided, well, look, I can ask them and they'll say no. And the cheating thing as well to get on the course, it's like I got to the point where no one is going to stop me doing this. And anything that gets in my way, I'm going to work a way around it or over it or through it. And that's really, I think, was the main thing that I just kept on going. Yeah, because I wasn't very good. It wasn't like I was bringing something to the meeting. It wasn't, I was just getting away with it,
I'm so glad you did that, because had you not, and you just followed down that path you were on, it wouldn't have been fulfilling.
It's weird because I was 27 and you hear like all these things. I think it's probably because the age of 30 was creeping up on me, and I was thinking, well, am I going to be fixing air conditioners forever? And the weird thing was that the company that I worked for, the first company I worked with was Eastaway Air Conditioning. The next one was Acre Engineering. And the guy who ran it, and this is such an Australian story, they call it the lucky country, because if you go there and you work really hard, things happen for you in Australia. Not the same in the UK, but they do. The Australians have an expression: you should always bite off more than you can chew, and then chew like baggery. And
really, wow.
Yeah. And the boss of this company, it was only a small company, it was about 6 people work there, and his name was Rob, and he'd done really well out of it. They had the air conditioning maintenance contracts for all the schools south of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, all of the police stations, the courthouses. These were all government jobs. And in a business where you're a contractor like that, the hardest thing is getting paid. But when it's a government job, the 20th of the month, they pay the bill. And so over his life, he'd very craftily only taken on clients that he knew would pay, and pay regularly and pay well. So he had all these clients that he looked after their air conditioning. And he came into the office one day and he said to me, "Mate, I've decided I'm going to retire." I said, "Oh, Rob, right, what's happening to the business?" He said, "I'd like to give it to you." And I said, "Well, mate, I don't know anything about running a business, and surely this is worth something." He says, "Oh, yeah, you'll pay me for it. We'll work out a price." I said, "Rob, I haven't got any money." "Oh, mate, I'll loan you the money, and you can keep me on as a consultant for in case anything, gets stuck." He goes, "Put your wife in the office. Mate, your ship's coming, you're set for life." And at that time, I was about halfway through the process of applying to the Australian Film, TV and Radio School. And I said to him, "Rob, this would be lovely. I mean, I've only been in the country about a year and a half." I said, this would be lovely, but, I really want to get into broadcasting." He looked at me sideways and he said, "Mate, all right, let me know." And then on the day that I'd got into AFTRS, I had to go and tell him. And I said, "Mate, it's a very generous offer, and I know you'd set me up for life here, but it's not really what I see myself doing for the rest of my life. I'd rather be broken on the radio than, comfortable and working doing this." And he went, "Mate, you're mad. You're bloody mad, mate." And he was wrong, because I've never regretted it, because I've had such an adventure in broadcasting. It's just been great, and adventure is the only way to describe it. The things I've done, the people I've met, the people I've interviewed, the situations I've been in, the doors it's opened, been amazing. So Rob was wrong on that one, but that's just the way things work out. I don't regret it at all.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful that you followed your passion.
Yeah, I was very lucky, and so far so good.
So who's, and all the people you've interviewed, are there one or two people that stand out that you just really, really enjoyed talking to over the years?
Yeah, I did. I sat in with John Cleese in his office in Chelsea, and I sat with him for about an hour and a half and did an interview with him, and that was lovely, because he's always someone I've liked. And, that was great. I talked to Alan Alda recently, actually, but that was over Zoom. But that was another.
I listened to that. That was a great interview.
Yeah, he was so lovely. So I've
the shoes, because I could have sent you shoes if that would have been helpful. tell us what was the shoe bit?
Well, yeah, when I was speaking to Alan, it wasn't long after I'd got into audiobook narrating, and I'd read his book. Before I knew I was going to interview him, I read his book because I like him. And in his book, he talks about how he manages to find the voice and the character when he's acting, and he would look down at the shoes. So whatever character he's playing, and that would often tell him how to play the character. And he even talks in his book that when he played Hawkeye Pierce, before they yelled action, he really didn't know how he was going to do him. And he looked at the army boots and the thing. And so I said to him, look, I'm doing audiobooks and I've got to do all these characters, but there are no shoes.
Arranged.
But he gave me another great tip. Was just think about the person who'll be listening to the book.
Yeah.
That's who you should really think about when you do an audiobook. And that is a great tip. And you've probably found that too. What's your tip, Danielle, when you do them?
Well, I've most of mine has been educational and announcing. So it's just so actually I had intended on doing this book myself, and I played with some of the voices, but the way that you went in and out of character and the transitions, I don't have that down like you have that down. So to me, I always thought of an audiobook as just, telling a good story, but I didn't realize it could be like theater. I don't know. You probably didn't see my blog, so I'll just tell you real quick. But when I had you and some other people, I was listening to the auditions, and I had some very definite things in mind that I was listening for. And I was listening for, audio quality, obviously, just a general good speaking voice, the character development, and the comedic timing, because I think I'm hysterical, but not everybody else is going to. And just to give it a shot, they have to have that timing. And so I had John, my husband, listening with me, and yours came on, and you just had such a warm voice that I'm listening. You could have been talking about air conditioning units, and I would have followed you to the end. And he's like, hey, he's really good. He hits all your points. Oh, he's got the timing down. And I realized I wasn't auditioning you. I was just listening. So then I had to go back and listen again. And I'm like, that's it then. That's how I knew you were the person that was meant to do it. So, but
it was so when I did the audition piece, that it was so nicely written, and the interaction between the characters and then the narrator, it was so easy to jump from one thing to the other and just make it flow. Some of the ones I auditioned for, I get about 4 or 5 lines in and I go, nah. Just, there's a lot of stuff out there that isn't that well written. But yours was really, really nice to do. And I didn't, until after the audition, I didn't have a real feel for what the book was about. It was only when I started doing the book properly, it was like, oh, this is really interesting to have these people coming here to collect this data. And yeah, that was... it was a really good experience. It's been fun doing the books, but yours was really, really good. Yours is only the second science fiction one I've done. I did a time travel one a few months ago. Yours is only the second one of those. But I've actually, when I go for the audition, I look for the science fiction ones because I had so much fun doing it. Because the characters, they can be, literally out of this world, giant salamander,
That was the hardest thing, and maybe we'll talk about this on the next interview when we talk about the book, but the hardest thing was getting out of my head, it doesn't have to be this world. It can be anything, and as long as you have it loosely based in truth, people will go with you. Yeah.
So if it's a good story and the characters have got, you can, empathize with the characters or hate the characters in some cases, because you got some nasty people in there. It all works, yeah.
So I'll ask one more question, then I'm going to shut up because Cindy probably wants to get a word in edgewise. I've been yapping the whole time. But what character, was there one that was particularly challenging to do, or were they all about even?
The one I love is Ivan, because he's a Scotsman, and I love doing Scotsman. So I loved doing him. The ones I get the most nervous about are the Americans, because I'm not American. And I always think, does this sound phony to an American? So I stress out about doing Americans. I really do. And I do my best. I don't think they're perfect, but I get away with it. They're the ones so when Lucine was American, and Drake, But Drake was New York. He's more New York American.
Yeah,
They're the ones.
Good thug voice.
What's that?
Good thug voice on.
You liked it? Oh, I'm glad it worked. I decided I was going to make all of the aliens English or British. So that's why the Royals are like comedy versions of our current queen. And then the thug, he was from York, the salamander, their henchman. What was his name?
Oh, you're talking about Fredo.
Fredo, yeah. I made him Yorkshire. in Yorkshire, they're a bit hard, They're a bit hard. Yorkshire, we don't mess about in Yorkshire, and I wanted him to be hard, So I made, and that's why Tanager is kind of posh. But yeah, I made them all the aliens, I made them British.
Danielle, did you tell him who Ivan is based on?
So Ivan, my husband, is not Scottish. He's actually Spanish descent, but he's Ivan, pretty much. He's a caricature.
Oh, well, I hope I didn't insult him in any way.
No.
Because, in fact, you didn't say he was Scottish. You said he was, I think your description was Viking.
Because I didn't know, I was really careful not to over-define, because I didn't want you to even feel like you needed to do American voice or this voice. I just wanted to get the essence and see where it went. So, so I just went with Viking. But he does not have that accent. But his character is based on him and some of Fatima. It's our interactions at home. Unless you knew us, you wouldn't know that we're like, we wrote ourselves. I wrote myself into the book. But when he was one of the test readers, and I said, just so you know, it's a caricature of you, because I was worried.
You told him.
I thought I was going to, well, if he would figure it out. And I thought I was going to offend him, but he was actually flattered. So.
Oh, that's nice.
No, I thought Ivan was my favorite, but of course I'm biased. So.
Well,
he was my favorite because I love doing Scotsman. Sorry, Cindy, what were you saying?
He's my favorite too because of the quirkiness of him and all the things he invents was just so interesting.
Yeah. But when I read it, I thought it said Scotsman to me. He's got the beard and he's, and the way he speaks and the things he's into. And yeah, he just said Scottish to me.
It worked.